Well, Donald Trump, meanwhile, doubling down on calling Democrats enemies from within. The former president first made the comments over the weekend on Fox News. His minions desperately tried to spin what he said into something it wasn't. And yesterday, Trump repeated those comments during a taped town hall with Fox News in front of an audience of all women voters. Fox did not release any advanced clips of that town hall, just some of the transcripts. It is set to air later this morning. Meanwhile, former Secretary of Defense Mark Esper, who served, of course, in the Trump administration, says the American people should take Trump very seriously when he suggests he would use the military against American citizens.
Do you fear that he would try to utilize the National Guard, the military, against U.S. citizens?
Yes, I do, of course, because I lived through that. And I saw over the summer of 2020 where President Trump and those around him wanted to use the National Guard in various capacities in cities such as Chicago and Portland and Seattle.
With us now, contributing writer at The Atlantic, Pete Wehner. He's a senior fellow at the Trinity Forum, and his latest piece is titled, "This Election is Different." And Pete, it certainly is. You know, I was just thinking about our relationship through the years. It's been wonderful, but, you know, we had some tense moments during the Bush administration when you worked inside the Bush administration. Right. And, you know, we seem to be talking to each other a lot. Me saying, why is he doing this? Why is he doing that? And I, you know, very critical of George W. Bush throughout that administration, and we went back and forth. But when election time came, I voted for George W. Bush. In fact, I voted for Republicans my entire life. And it's one thing I'm trying to tell my Republican friends right now is, if you've ever not voted for a Republican for president in your life, this is the election to do it. This is different, just like I thought 2020 was different, just like I thought 2016 was different. So talk about why this election is different, even for I don't know if you're a former Republican. I'm a former Republican. But this election is different for Republicans and former Republicans who are still very conservative, like you and me.
Yeah, thanks, Joe. I think it's different because Donald Trump is different. I mean, he is a threat to the country in a way that no other figure, no other president or presidential candidate has been. This is not a dispute simply about public policy and public policy matters. You and I have spent our life in it. But there are some things that matter more. And that is the Constitution and the rule of law, and having a person in the presidency who has some degree of moral discernment and who has some measure of character that you can depend on. You know, we've had a range of people in the presidency, some better and some worse. But this is a man unlike anything we have seen. You know, you've quoted General Milley. He said that he's a fascist to the core, which I think is true. But it's not simply that he's a fascist to the core. He's an undisguised fascist to this core. He advertises that every single day in bright neon lights. And I think Republicans who love their country need to defend their country. And defending their country at this point means voting for Kamala Harris, even if you've been a lifelong Republican.
You know, Pete, Anne Applebaum said in Twilight of Democracy that there's this lie about these right-wing populists that fuel these anti-immigrant, anti-intellectual, anti-democracy movements. And it's that they're like these dumb, poor yokels that just stumble to the voting booth and don't know what you're doing. And she says, you know, no, they're fueled by elites that give a permission structure for everybody else to vote for these anti-democratic populists. I just want to ask you, I could name names and it would make this far more focused of a conversation, but I don't want to do that. I don't want to embarrass anybody. I would just ask you how much it has hurt you personally to have people that you looked up to your adult life, people that you worshipped with, people who you read and learned from, people who you held up as examples who are now cravingly following the crowd out of fear of standing up and doing something courageous like, say, Liz Cheney.
Yeah, it's been painful. It's been personally painful. I mean, there are people, as you said, that you looked up to. For as long as I've been alive, starting as a kid, I've had role models, looked to heroes to try and pattern my life after, and probably overly idealistic in that respect. But I think we need that in life. And so when you are with people or in a movement filled with people that you thought were one way, and then they act another way, and they act in a way that you think by your own lights is morally off track and wrong. You know, that's hard. I've tried really hard as you have to enter into their world, Joe, and to try and understand why they think the way they do, why they say what they do, why they vote the way they do. So I'm pretty acquainted with their line of reasoning, but in the end, I just don't think it holds together. I think an enormous amount of denial is going on, and that denial is bad for them, but it's worse for the country.
Yeah, it will be bad for them eventually if he's elected. You're right. No election prior to the Trump era, regardless of the outcome, ever caused me to question the fundamental decency of America. I want to drill down a bit more on that. And let's talk about, since you and I had the same background, the evangelical churches we grew up with, the evangelical people we worshiped with, the people who, as a congressman, I had trouble going to Sunday school. I had trouble going to Bible studies. I had trouble going to anything without somebody coming up in my face going, how could we have a man like Bill Clinton as president of the United States? Does character not matter? Have you not read Bill Bennett's Book of Virtues? What is wrong with you? And then they would talk about the character of Ronald Reagan, the character of the... They are now voting for a man. I will not go into the details of where he's fallen short personally, because we have all sinned and fallen short of God's glory. I will just use his words. He has said he does not need God's forgiveness. And for those that don't read the Bible, for those who do not understand what's at the center of any evangelical's faith or any Christian's faith, we are all flawed. We are only saved by grace. We're not saved by good work. We are saved by grace. And it's when we go before God and say, we have failed you again, please forgive me. That's the center. That's the foundation of the faith. And they are voting for a man who said, I don't need God to forgive me. So how do they say, I'm voting for my Christian values? I'm going to vote for a man who every day undermines everything that Jesus said in the Beatitudes and says he doesn't need God's forgiveness.
Yeah, you know, it's a psychological trick that they're playing. I mean, they've justified it by turning this race into an existential crisis that the Democrats and the progressives are against Americans. So Trump is the only thing that stands between them and catastrophe. But of course, it's the opposite thing. And I do think what you're getting, the point you're making, Joe, is exactly right. There's been a catastrophic damage that's been done to the Christian witness, because this is a moral freak show. People look at the hypocrisy that you were talking about, people who went after Bill Clinton with a figurative 2x4, you know, every day that he was in office. And now they're defending a man who makes Bill Clinton look like a Boy Scout. And I think what is underneath it, I mean, it's a very complicated question. I think what we've found out is a kind of CAT scan on the evangelical movement is that there has been pulsating grievances and resentments and anger that Trump really tapped into. And what's happened is I think that faith is secondary. It's subordinate to the core identity that a lot of these people have. If you gave them sodium pentothal, I think they would say faith is the most important thing in their life. But in reality, it's not. And I think what they've done is they've proof texted the Bible and talked to themselves and created a narrative where they think they're being faithful. And you know, you can understand people make mistakes, but at the end of the day, there is moral accountability. And as we've been talking about, this is not subtle when it comes to Donald Trump. This is what his vileness, his depravity is something that he displays every day, and they seem to revel in it. It seems to be vivifying for them, and that is really, really sad, and it's sick.
Well, which is why our friend Tim Keller, near the end of his life, said, I've stopped calling myself an evangelical.
Right.
Because that's more of a political identity marker and a cultural identity marker than it is a marker of one's faith. Right. And how sad is that, Pete? How sad is that?
Yeah, no, that you know, Tim was such a significant figure, and he was a person that in his heart and at his core, he loved Jesus, and he was a follower of Jesus, and he knew what was happening, and he was willing to call it out in a careful and responsible way. And we miss his voice, and we need more people like him. Unfortunately, there are not many who were like him.
No, they're not. Contributing writer Pete Wehner, thank you so much for being with us. Always appreciate it.